Howdy, and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. Today I'm talking about the books that I read in February, which was heavy on fantasy and also on eARCS. I guess I really got in the mood to read some of my eARCS, which was probably a good thing because many of them came out in February. So let's start with some of those. The Painted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I did a reading blog review on this one earlier in the month, which I'll link here if you want some more detail of the story. This is pitched as a Sherlock and Holmes-esque mystery set in a unique fantasy world, which I think is true. The murder mystery plot is the main focus of the story. However, I think we do a disservice to the book to say that it's primarily a murder mystery and just leave the fantasy on the back burner, because the fantastical, speculative world elements involving the characters, the environment, they motivate why the characters do what they do. It's very integral to the story, and so I think even fans of fantasy who don't necessarily go in for murder mysteries would still enjoy this story, and I really recommend it for those fantasy elements. That said, the characters were also really fun, and the characters felt fresh, and there was some innovative world building as to why they are the way that they are. I really enjoyed that one, and I would highly recommend it. Another eARC was a Norse-inspired epic fantasy, A Flame in the North. This one took me by surprise in that it really felt Tolkien-esque. It really felt somewhat mythic, and even like the writing style, it was very nice, but it was almost sort of there was a distance to the reader, and yet even with that distance in the writing, I still got quite attached to the main characters. It's following a young woman who is a very important figure in her village. She is kind of a witch-like character. She has the special powers, which are not shunned, they are revered. And when her brother does something very foolish involving some visitors to the village, she winds up being kind of sent with them back to the north as a wereguild, or she has to kind of go with them for 1 year and 1 day for the sake of honor. Her shield maiden, her sworn protector, travels with her. And as they're going into the north with this small band of northerners, there's a more epic plot opening up. It really felt like it borrowed quite heavily from The Lord of the Rings in like the old evil, even some like poems and passages. It was really reminiscent of that. But the story we're telling is different. The world building is different. It just really reminded me of Tolkien. So if that's kind of what you're looking for, like a more modern written version of an epic Lord of the Rings, that's still different. I don't know. I was reminded of the Lord of the Rings a lot while reading it. However, it's not a carbon copy. It didn't feel like a fan fiction. It just felt like A Flame in the North was heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings. I digress. I still enjoyed reading it. It was different than what I expected, but I still liked it, and I think there is a sequel coming out sometime soon. Sidetracking to sequels and science fiction really quick, I finally finished Defiant by Brandon Sanderson, which was the 4th book in the Skyward Saga. This one I found very satisfying. In books 2 and 3, the scope of the story is widening, we're really exploring more of the world, and it gets a little bit away from the group dynamics of Spensa with her flight. We get back to that more in this book, which I do think a lot of readers are going to enjoy. That's kind of a common thing I've heard, is people really missed those dynamics from the first book. And I thought it was a really nice conclusion to the saga. Can't really say more than that because it's the end of a series, but I'm glad I read this one. I feel like it really grew. It's a young adult science fiction story, but Spensa really grew with the story, and I think that it's really upper YA / parts of it, the things she's dealing with are quite adult. And if you like science fiction, if you like this fighter squadron kind of training together, then going off to fight the struggle with, of course, the really unique twists that you get with Brandon Sanderson world building, I'd recommend it. I finally read some T. Kingfisher horror novellas, one of which was on my list to read for the year, What Moves the Dead. I was really inspired to read it because it has a sequel following the same main character that just was released, and I actually just got it from the library. What Moves the Dead is a gothic type horror where the main character is responding to their childhood friend's letter. It's a brother and a sister that this character grew up with, and the brother wrote and said that he thinks the sister is dying. The main character goes out to this really creepy manor that they've inherited and is trying to figure out what's going on. So a gothic horror with some interesting biology. I enjoyed it. What Feasts at Night is the one that just came out, which I've heard is less gothic, more supernatural spooky, which I think is more up my alley, so I'm looking forward to picking that one up. The other one I read was A House of Good Bones, which is contemporary horror rather than fantasy. I didn't enjoy this one as much because it was contemporary. I listened to it on audiobook and I thought that was a really fun way to do it. Mary Robinette Koa was the narrator. It's set in North Carolina, I believe. It's set in the South, and I thought she did the accents very well. In this story, the main character is returning home to stay with her mom briefly, and things are not right. It's like they've gone back in time to how her grandmother had the house set up when her grandmother was alive, but her grandmother is dead. However, her mother is acting strangely, and she's investigating that story. I think T. Kingfisher's really good at packing a punch and telling a great story in a novella type length, and I know I have a few more of hers that I need to check out. But next is the sequel to What Moves the Dead. And as far as horror level, like it's creepy. I would say it's more creepy than scary. I never really felt scared while reading or listening to the stories, mostly just creeped out. So I am less familiar with the horror genre. I'm sure there's spectrums. It's a manageable amount of horror, at least for a horror newbie like me. Then I was able to read another anticipated release of mine, The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. This one is quite different from her original fantasy series. It's a historical fiction focusing on World War I, really in the Ypres area, the trenches. The main character and her brother are Canadian. He is a soldier, gets sent to the front in France, and she is a nurse and winds up working there as well. Receives news that her brother is missing in action, but yet all his effects were sent to her. And through the supernatural there's a touch of supernatural to the story. She goes on this mission to figure out what happened to her brother. Is he dead? She has things telling her that he's not, so she wants to find out where he is. On the other side of that, the story follows her brother from several months prior. So it's a dual timeline, but only separated by a couple months, and you're going through what happened to him as you're seeing her investigating it, which I thought was a really neat setup. It's quite bleak. She isn't shying away from terrors and the horrors of World War I, and I really think her focus of the story was talking about the war's impact on these people, the nurses, the soldiers, and the supernatural sort of element to it is a really nice touch that's very, very, very unsettling. If you're looking for something that feels just like her Bear and the Nightingale trilogy, I think you'll be disappointed. So you have to go into this one understanding that it's a different type of story. It's a kind of a dark historical fantasy. That said, I kind of read it in pieces because it was a lot. It was pretty heavy. I do recommend reading this one. I think that she spent a lot of attention on the details, and it's a very unique way to tell this sort of story. Ending a little bit on a cheerier note, I read The Thursday Murder Club. Actually, I listened to the audiobook by Richard Osman. This story follows several people in a retirement community who have been interested in solving cold cases because one of them is a retired police officer, and then a murder happens on their doorstep and they sort of team up with the police and are determined to solve it. I really want to continue on with the series. I think it's pretty episodic and there are 4 or 5 in the series, so I will be continuing with this one. It was fun. There were twists and turns. There was a lot of cleverness, and I liked the relationships that were built between the various characters in the story. So that's those are the highlights of what I read this month. If I had to pick a favorite of what I read this month, it would be The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I think if you like speculative or if you like murder mysteries, you will enjoy that one, and I really highly recommend that you pick that up. If you like epic fantasy, I would say go A Flame in the North. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, don't forget to support your local library. Thanks.